Welcome to the iPhoneography podcast. I'm Greg McMillan, and it is, as we record this, Monday, July 28th. It has been a scorcher here in Canada, or at least where I am, and I'm sure it has been for these guys too. Let's bring them in. Dave and Dwight, how you doing, guys?
Good. How you guys doing? Good to see you.
Sweating various parts of my body off.
Yes. Yeah, no doubt. So today we're going to talk about reflections, how to capture reflections or use reflections in your iPhone photography. So brief summary, exploring the art of reflection of photography in photography using your iPhone. So that's basically what we're going to do. But one thing that happened, I guess it was maybe mid last week, our good friend Will Newcomb, who is from China. I'm not sure if he's still in the UK or not. He was traveling last time last time we recorded. But if he's home now, he might be in the chat at some point. Could be there now. I don't know. But he was posting some really cool reflection pictures. And we had already established that this is what we were going to do. And I don't know if you guys seen them or not, but one that stands out in my memory was one of his cat with the floor reflecting. And it was just a really beautiful picture of his cat, one of his cats, he's got many, with the reflection on the floor. So I made a comment on, I think it was that picture. I said, hold off on these reflection pictures. And I didn't tell him why. So Will, if you're listening, this is why. So we're going to, go through some points here about reflections, and we're going to look at pictures as we go, as we always do. But again, if you caught the last show, we're kind of changing things up with how we do our recent photos. Now, they may not be so recent. They don't have to be so recent, but we want them to fit the topic, right? So as we talk about certain aspects of reflections, we're going to show an image and kind of that image is going to relate to the point. But stay tuned to the end of this show on the YouTube audience, because I got something, we kind of got something special put together, and hoping that this could be a regular feature on the podcast. But it's YouTube only, so that kind of gives you a little hint of what it might be, but that's all I'm going to say for now. But the first thing I want to touch on really is why reflections in photography are so powerful. They add visual interest and symmetry, and forgive me for looking at the notes all the time here, but we got a lot of points here. They create surreal, abstract, or emotional impact. So I think you might see some of that maybe as we go through, and they could tell a story in a unique, layered way. And there's one shot in particular that I think kind of fits that. But so how the iPhone handles reflections. Dwight, you want to touch on this first one? Because I'm going to bring one of your pictures up here.
Sure.
Let me see here.
Yeah. So this was taken with the standard lens, your standard
main lens.
Main lens, yeah. And it was tricky to kind of get all of the lighting, the reflection and the windows into the frame. I could have used, the wide angle, but everything would have been distorted. How you get a perspective on all the vertical lines. But I kind of moved my feet around, and I tried to make sure that I framed this around the original source of light and the reflection. So it kind of a central composition along the center of the photo, and then the source light is on the top and the reflection light is on the bottom. And I think what this does is gives you, kind of a leading line, kind of has you look down the hallway. The tricky thing with this one was the editing process, because, and Greg will probably touch on this later, but in a challenging situation like this, where you have really dark darks and light lights, you still have to expose for the highlights. So the challenge was exposing for the highlights, and then everything else got dark. The midtones and the shadows got real dark. So in the editing process, I had to fix that by bringing up the midtones and the shadows and not the highlights, because they were going to get blown out. But anyway, the main camera worked for this one perfectly, I think.
And I think the ultra wide could have been used. I don't know if maybe from a different angle, but or maybe just to isolate one of the windows because it's such a long it would have been such a long, stretched out photo and even a little wider, but I think it might have been made for an interesting composition, maybe looking straight on the window and getting that reflection in the floor. But I mean, one of the things about the iPhone camera, like as it relates to, the point we're talking here about is the strength of the iPhone camera, is that it's got a fairly decent dynamic range. And, in an image like this, that's really helpful. But like you said, you had to expose for the highlights because, you know, something that maybe we'll get into more in depth with at some point, and we've touched on it before, is the fact that if you blow out the highlights with an iPhone camera, they're gone. You can't get them back. Smart HDR when you're shooting like HEIF or JPEG really does a good job of kind of constraining that dynamic range to the point where you keep the highlights. But when you shoot in RAW and even Pro RAW, I think it kind of retains them the best it can. But when you shoot just RAW, like Bayer RAW, that's Bayer, Bayer RAW, you're not using any of the computational stuff that the iPhone puts into the camera. You're shooting you're just getting the raw data for the image. And if you overblow the highlights, they're gone. You can't get them back. You can underexpose the shadow areas as much as you want, but you can, well, maybe not as much as you want, but a lot better than blowing out the highlights. You can get the shadows back. So
yeah. So I think Greg, when Greg is talking about blowing out the highlights, it essentially means that there's no color there. So if you went to print it, there'd just be no color. So as photographers, we try to prevent that and maintain some of the original color in there. And Greg, I think to your earlier point about the wide camera, I think I tried that, but it really brought in a lot of, you guys might recognize this from movies, Blade Runner, a few other things, but it really brought a lot more of the bank area into the photograph that I would have had to really crop out. But it's still a good point that could have worked, and I think it would have been a little bit more of an artistic perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, Dwight, real quick.
So, go ahead.
I was going to ask real quick on this one. Where was, in terms of the sun, was the sun not coming directly through? Because I'm not seeing like heavy shadows, like the sun is directly pointing outside the windows there, but you're gonna gain more of an indirect light.
No, it was.
Do you remember that?
It was probably, if those windows are 12 o'clock, the sun was probably about 3 o'clock in the southwest sky back there. But remember, when I exposed for the highlights, everything else was almost black.
Okay.
Right. So I didn't do any exposure bracketing or anything like that. I think if we shot that in Bayer RAW, we would have to have it on a tripod and take different shots of the shadows and the highlights and combine them. But
yeah, I would think so.
But this one, I was able to, recover some of the shadows, the midtones and the shadows, just to, bring back some of that detail because that was almost gone.
Yeah. And that is one advantage of the main camera versus the ultra wide. Even the 16, where the ultra wide's 48 megapixel, it still doesn't handle the light as well as the main.
Yeah, that's a good point. And
that is also something about too.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think this might have been this was not taken recently. This might have been before Pro RAW. So this might even have been an HEIC photo.
Okay.
Which to Greg's point, handles the dynamic range pretty well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a really cool reflection shot. That floor, it looks so shiny. It looks wet.
Yeah, they spend a lot of time on that. It's amazing. There's always somebody buffing the floors in there, and when you see it, and we talked about this in another podcast. You kind of look at something and you say, okay, I see how that could frame up. And I just dropped everything and said, how can I get all of that in one shot? But yeah, the floor looks wet. It was very clean when I took that shot, and it's roped off. You
Yeah.
can't get in there.
Mm.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I think I had to
Yeah.
crop out
Oh, it makes sense.
some of the stuff in the foreground, keeping people out. So
Hmm.
Yeah. So the next point we want to hit on is the types of reflections to look for. And Dwight, your next image is a case in point for water, right?
yeah,
You know, so you want to touch on the different types of reflections to look for, and if we have to go to the next image, we'll go ahead and do that too.
yeah, that's fine. I mean, if you can imagine this without any reflection at all, in my opinion, it wouldn't be that great of a photo. I just happened to be playing this hole, and I saw the reflection of the palm trees and a little bit of the mountains in the background. I see a mistake that I made in my editing because I dodge and burn the mountains in the background and not in the reflection.
Mm.
So
Ah, but you know what though? I don't know if that would really,
I think we can get
you
away with
know,
it.
I think so.
I might have
Yeah.
tried it at a really low opacity, but anyway, I mean, back to again, you're looking at it with your own eyes and you're thinking, "Wow, this is really beautiful. Why is it beautiful?" Well, I'm seeing shadows from the tree off to the right. I'm seeing shadows or I'm sorry, reflections from the tree off the right. I'm seeing the reflections from the palm trees, which kind of gives me a natural frame. And the lily pads in the foreground, was just kind of a near element that I wanted to, have for the foreground. Everything else kind of lined up on on the upper third. But I think, having that reflection there, in my opinion, makes the photograph because it would have just looked like a lake with some lily pads and without it, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
But also say that if the lily pads weren't there, it would also seem to be lacking something because you can kind of tell the sky. There's very few clouds in that sky, so you're not getting a reflection of clouds. You'd be getting a blue gradient.
Correct.
So this kind of fills that empty space in front. So
Yeah.
it doesn't feel, and having, like you said, we've talked about perspective about, having something close, middle, and far away. Without the close there, it would lose a lot of the connection. You just have more of a blank area going out there.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is composition now, and I
Hmm.
don't think if the lily pads weren't there, if they weren't there, I would have cropped in tighter, maybe
Hmm.
on a 16:9, you know, something like that, just to have, a shorter height and maintain that width. You're right, it wouldn't have been really a worthwhile photo, not that interesting.
And I think too, with regards to a photo like this, where there's reflection in the water, and then you have foreground, and basically those lily pads are they're like a foreground. The height that you have the camera will make a difference in how that presents itself. So what I'm looking at is the reflection of the mountain. It doesn't run into the bottom, the big pile of lily pads in the bottom left-hand corner. It it kind of peaks in between the 2 sets of lily pads, which I think is perfect because had you been crouched down, then the peaks of the mountains would have been lost in the lily pads. You wouldn't have had that reflection. And same goes with the tops of the palm trees. They would have been lost in the lily pads as well. So I don't think you could have gotten a better composition than this, because you've got the palm trees in their entirety and
Mhm.
you've got the mountains without destroying the peaks in the foreground. So that's something else to watch out for is when when you're doing a reflection, pay attention to that because that's going to make or break an image. Just because the way the reflection goes, the height of the camera makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I think when I got ready for this shot, I naturally wanted the reflection and the palm trees to be kind of the same size in the photo. If I would have gotten lower, the reflection would have been
Mhm.
smaller. If I would have gotten
Yeah.
higher, the reflection would have been longer.
Yeah.
And there would have been more emphasis on the homes than really just that little slice of visual I wanted to portray.
Yep. Another very common type of reflection is a window reflection. And so with this shot here, Dave, I mean, you have a reflection, but you can also see your subject through the window, but the reflection really adds to it.
Yeah. So that way you can see what she's looking at. So cat looking out,
Exactly.
yeah, you have a cat looking out the window, kind of looking towards the steps down the street. And it's one thing to see the cat itself. And this is, there are programs to get rid of reflection, but I like the fact that the reflection was pretty clear and you could actually kind of see what she's looking at. So you're kind of brought into what she was seeing out there.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's kind of cool because a lot of people would want to take that reflection away, but that kind of tells the story, right? That tells the story of the image.
Well, it gives you a
And
perspective of what the cat is looking at as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. You could almost tell just by the angle of her eyes,
Mm-hmm.
that's what she's looking at. So, yeah, that's pretty cool.
But I would also
So,
say,
my other
well, I was
yeah, go ahead.
sorry about glass. You can always go with your classic high reflective glass. And we
Yeah.
don't have an example here, and it also depends on the angle you're at. When you're, and this is true with water and glass in terms of how much you're getting reflected back. Where if you're getting more of a straight on shot, you won't get as much reflection as if you're at a steeper angle. So if you're at a kind of if you're not looking straight on, but if you're looking more in an angle, you'll get a lot more reflection. And it also depends on what the glass is made out of. There's a building downtown Pittsburgh, think it still is, I'm not sure, but PPG Place, made out of reflective glass. And it, it really, really shines off.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and, and even colored glass could produce pretty cool reflections too.
Exactly.
So, I mean, another common type of reflection is metal. You got like the reflection in a car. Let's see, appliances, street fixtures. The human eye can produce a reflection. If you got a macro lens, you can get up close to the human eye. Well, even if you don't, but I mean, it's a lot nicer if you do. But you can get the reflection of say, like a window in somebody's eye to tell the story that the eye is the window to the soul, type of thing. Screens can make reflections. TV screens, computers, phones, whatever, and unexpected sources like this one here that you took, Dave. I thought this was pretty interesting.
So, yeah, I was actually in the passenger side car, the passenger side, which unusual. Ruth was driving. Very proud of her. But I just noticed that this is a side view mirror. So I opened up the window. We were stopped at a light and and I had to do a little cropping, but took it kind of looking back and did a couple things where the sky was a lot more blue. So a little artistic there, if you will, in terms of not being the full color, but getting that look back, especially with the telephone poles kind of going off in the distance behind you. I kind of like that. And the fact you can still see in the bottom, where it says mirror are closer than they appear.
Closer than they appear,
So you can actually see the writing in the mirror there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you captured a nice kind of a story here because you can see there's a relatively large amount of traffic around you, and then the telephone poles going down to the left show that's probably the street probably parallels those, and it kind of draws you back there wondering what's back there. But yeah, it's kind of industrial. I like it.
Yeah, and this is what I was kind of alluding to when I said earlier about, tell a story in a unique, layered way.
Mm-hmm.
The layers are, it's a mirror because of the writing on it, and you could say, okay, I'm on not a winding road, but a road that apparently has some sort of a bend in it, as the way the hydro poles go, and it looks like it could be a busy time of day because there seems to be what would appear to be a lot. It gives you the idea that there's a lot of traffic. And I like the way you captured the car right behind you, just with, you can't see the driver, but the driver just poking out that side there. It's a kind of a real cool image, almost mysterious maybe. But and what did you say, Dwight? Something about the age of it or something?
Well, yeah,
Or
it looks
tells a
kind of
story, yeah.
industrial,
Industrial.
Yeah.
That's the
Industrial,
word.
yeah.
and that light
Yeah,
ties in
yeah,
with
so-
the tones on the left too. So it's
Mhm.
you're right, Greg. It's mysterious. You can't see the driver. He or she's the only
Yeah.
one that has the lights on. It seems like they mean business. It's like,
Yep.
you know what I mean? It's almost like, hey,
And
don't stay in my way too long. That kind of thing.
you can't even really tell what time of day it is, or
Yeah.
I mean, you could pretty well gather it's overcast, cloudy looking type of thing.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I think there's a lot of mystery to it,
hmm
which is kind of neat. So, tips for capturing better reflections. Now, we don't have images for all of these, so I'll take that away. And the first one is getting low for puddle reflections. Dwight, you've mentioned this a few times in the past, so you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think I did touch on it on a previous podcast. But if you see something that is really nice, it could be a sunset, it could be colorful lights. You see something that might work for a reflection photo. If you've got a water bottle, just hopefully you drank the good water and you have tap water in it or something, but pour it out on the road, on the street. Be safe, be careful where you're at, but turn your iPhone upside down and bring that lens down as far as you can without getting it wet. And then you can kind of find a nice angle to take that shot at. And many times you can get a nice reflection photo that way. And, that to me is really kind of fun, after rain, or, you can do it artificially with a water bottle. But I've gotten some nice ones doing that.
Yeah. And the same works with natural puddles and things like that. I've taken quite a few shots of reflections in puddles, but I've never really got down that low to see what I could get. So I got to put that, in the back of the memory bank and give that a try one of these times.
It's really cool for sunsets to get really low. You might get a seashell
Yeah.
or something in front of you, and
Yeah, it would be. And symmetry or central framing. And you had a tip there too, Dwight?
yeah. I think if you recall the Union Station photo, I had my grid lines on, and that helped me align, say, the center line between the windows and the reflections, in the photo, to minimize cropping and losing pixels, in post processing. So, I'm an advocate of using those lines to help you with symmetry, or framing up your shot in the best manner possible from a composition standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, the grid lines are as long as I've been shooting with an iPhone, I always have them on. I just find them so useful in so many ways. Leading lines is another, I guess, compositional way of capturing. So I think, your Union Station photo could be an example of leading
Mhm.
lines. Maybe not necessarily for the reflection, but that's all part of it. I mean, just with the fact that everything kind of goes off to one side like that. Tap to focus and expose on bright areas. That's a pretty common. Like basically we touched on that with the overexposing part. We
Mhm.
don't want to overexpose. And here's another one. Consider long exposure effects with water. So let me get this. And Dave, you got a really cool shot of Pittsburgh, PA.
Yep, this is actually an early morning shot, so you can see the sun in the background. They're hidden behind clouds, luckily, so it didn't wash everything out. But the rivers were very calm that day. So the reflections turned out real good, because this is not, if you have a very, let's say, a bit of water that's too choppy or too active, the reflections will kind of not only get distorted, but especially with long reflection, they may just go away and you'll just see the water down there. So by having it like this, like you said, with the long exposure, where it also helps the clouds because, the cloud's just moving a little bit there. And obviously, unless you're in California sometimes, the building's not moving. It kind of sharpens the building versus the sky.
Yeah.
So it makes a nice little touch there.
And the different ways you can achieve this is one with a live photo.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave, you shoot them almost exclusively, I think. And in the editing, you can select different kinds of effects to have with the live photo, and one of them is long exposure, and that's a perfect way to get that soft look in the water. If there's any waves at all, it'll soften them up a bit. You can use an app like Rehelb, where you can just hand hold the phone and get up to 30-second exposures out of it that way. Sometimes tricky, but really good at what it does. And, but if you have a tripod, you could use things like slow shutter cam. Any camera app that has a long exposure feature in it will get these kind of shots. So that's always a good way to smoothen out those reflections, especially if they're really choppy, the water's really choppy. Let's see, what else do we have? So the best times for reflections, you can't go wrong with golden hour. But like some of the pictures we've seen here, it could be overcast, it can be bright sunny day. It doesn't really matter. But if you want to, make the image kind of dramatic, then the golden hour is a pretty good bet. But you got blue hour or nighttime. But you can also use reflections in a way that will create mood in the image. And Dwight has done just that with this one.
Yeah, so we just spoke about symmetry, right? So this is the drive coming into the La Quinta Resort, and we were talking about this a little bit before air, how light reflection, when it's really dark out, can create kind of a mood, right? I mean, that's all over the desert out there, and one of the things that I really like, and I was walking with my family, I said, we got to capture this drive, because I know that I'm going to get some good symmetry and leading lines going down the drive. And if you look at the branches, you can tell it was really windy because some of them are blurry. But I've got to look at my notes here. Obviously, I've cropped for symmetry. We talked about cropping, adds visual interest and symmetry, captured at night. For me, it creates an emotional impact. Something calming about reflective lighting at night. And I did use Pro Raw on this one to preserve the highlights and the shadows. So I was able to recover, those. Again, if I would have taken that in bare raw, that would have been a little bit tougher. I don't think it would have worked without some exposure bracketing.
And, that's something that I really never put much mind to as far as reflections go, is the fact that it's reflected light. The light is reflected off of things, so in this case, it's the trees, even the road in a couple of spots. Yeah. So, I mean, that's reflections. The light is reflecting off of a surface. So that's kind of another way of looking at it. And I just noticed we have David Addison in the house. Hey, David. Glad to see you.
That's my buddy.
And yeah. So, yeah, it's really interesting, how we can have different takes on the word reflection. I mean, I don't think we have any examples of it, and I don't even think it's in our notes, but you can capture reflection in somebody who's just kind of sitting there thinking, they're reflecting on something. You could go that far with it if you want. But let's see what else we got in our notes here. Yeah, tap to focus on the bright spots. Oh yeah, well, after the rain, puddles and surfaces become natural mirrors. So yeah, that's a good time to go for reflections. If it just finished raining, take a walk around the block and see what you can get. So then there's editing. So you can edit for reflections. There are different apps that you can use. Like a lot of the favorites are, the Photos app, Snapseed, Lightroom Mobile, and Photomator, and recently Luminar Mobile has become a popular one, I think. You can enhance for clarity and contrast, but keep an eye out for crushing shadows and blown out highlights. So there's that highlights thing again. Crushing shadows, again, I can't stress enough that it's not as bad as overexposing the highlights. So, again, keep an eye on, best way to deal with highlights is turn on zebra stripes. And when you turn on zebra stripes, it shows you one color, maybe more than likely red, will be the overexposure, or like the overexposed parts of an image. Or you could have like dark blue or something like that, or blue lines might show you the underexposed shadow areas. And if you're using a camera app that has these, like the Apple camera app doesn't have it, but if you're using an app that has these things, which a lot of the third-party camera apps do, and you have that turned on, like, compose your shot, and then dial the exposure down until if the zebra stripes for the highlights are present, dial your exposure down either by lowering the ISO or raising the shutter speed and to a faster shutter speed, and just until they disappear, all of them, wherever they are in the frame, they all have to disappear, and then take your shot. Because then in post, like in your editing, that's when you can bring up your shadow areas and things like that. You can get all that stuff back, but at least you'll have your highlight areas. They're not going to be overblown. So that's probably the biggest tip I give to people when they talk about exposing and things like that. Let's see here. You can enhance clarity and contrast. Yeah. Remove distractions and imperfections. So, the Photos app has the cleanup tool now, and in iOS 18. And, there's apps like Touch Retouch, things like that can, remove little artifacts or whatever.
Let's say Touch
crop for symmetry and mood.
Retouch is really good for getting rid of power lines. Where the Apple Photos Remove will do a good job on larger objects, but it seems to struggle a little bit with a thin line. And Touch Retouch does have a line option where it will just pick out the line. And it's unless you're really pixel peeping, it's really hard for the average person to tell, especially if you're showing it online, where unfortunately we're going to lose resolution. People won't really notice a pixel here or there if you're getting rid of a power line if it is distracting in the image versus using it to highlight something in the image.
I think Touch Retouch is probably the best app for doing stuff like that. There's a part in Photomator that has it.
Okay. Hold on. We got to deal with Dwight shaking a head. It's probably the best standalone removal. Yeah, right. The best mobile standalone.
Yeah.
Lightroom Mobile's pretty good, but nothing beats Photoshop.
But I will also say there is
remember,
a trade-off.
I'm a desktop editor. Yeah,
I know, but there is also a trade-off between how much time you want to put in to remove an object. Even though I think Photoshop probably getting better with AI and letting things select automatically, versus having in the past. You talk to people who've used programs 10 years ago. All that was manual selection, and it was a pain.
Yeah, I can remove telephone lines. I can remove telephone lines and people with one click.
Yeah. Well, that's the power of Adobe, right?
But for mobile, you're right. I think Touch Retouch and Lightroom Mobile is probably the best.
Yeah. Lightroom Mobile is pretty good because it has that generative fill or generative remove, I guess it's called, and it gives you, every time you make take something out, it gives you 3 choices as to how it can look, type of thing, and it is pretty good. I believe that's part of the paid feature, is it? Yeah. So since I stopped subscribing to Lightroom Mobile, I've been relying heavily on Touch Retouch. Luminar Neo on the desktop has it, but it's not as good. It's just not as good. It acts more like just a clone tool, and it's sometimes it's blatantly obvious. So I tend to not use it that much. Now maybe it's going to get better. I don't know. We'll see. But another good way to get reflections is to make your own. So I use an app called Reflect, and there's a link in the show notes for it. And it's really good for creating a reflection. So this image here, it has a reflection in the lower part of the frame, but it doesn't really it doesn't really do anything for the image. So what I've done is I've used the app called Reflect, and there's different types of reflections you can use and you can put in there and whatnot. But I just added this reflection, and I think it just makes it much more interesting. And it, it creates the reflection out of what's in the opposite side of the frame. So one thing I had to do here though was there's a mask tool that you can use, and I used it to kind of as a buffer along the top part of the reflection that it created, because it was almost too harsh of a line. And if you look real close, you can see it here underneath the motor on the boat. You can almost see where the transition is from the real water to the reflected water. And I tried to hide that, but I guess I just didn't do it as well as I should have. But I think this makes a much more interesting reflection than than the original. So, I mean, and like I said, there's different kinds of reflections. I could have had a smoother reflection, maybe rougher water. I could have adjusted this one here to increase or decrease the amount of waves. And but yeah, it's a great app for making a reflection if you don't already have one. This is another one that I played with. I was doing some long exposures by this river, and the river was running wild, like really a lot of water running, and I was very disappointed in what I was getting for flowing water with that. So I thought I'd play around with this image and give it a reflection with Reflect, and this is what I got. So it just immediately calms the scene down, takes the rushing water away, and just makes it look more like a serene edge of a lake or something. And what I've done with the masking tool is I've masked out around where this leaf is on the far right-hand side, right at the edge of the water, rather than have the water just go through it. And a couple other spots I've kind of come down, and let the leaves show a little bit, the ferns and whatnot. I tried to match as best I could what was in the original image. So if I go back to the original, you can see some of the leaves are overhanging above the water, and there's that big leaf on the right-hand side. The leaf's actually in the foreground in the tree on this side of the river. And then when I go back to the edited version with the fake reflection, it's there a little bit, but I might have cut off a little bit. But I mean, really, because it's blowing in the wind, you probably wouldn't know or notice that it's been masked out like that. So making your own reflections with an app, and as far as I know, Reflect is the only one that can do this. Have you guys had any experience with any other apps that you can create your own reflection?
No, I've used Reflect for years, for my art challenges and stuff. So that's the only one I know about. But the masking is relatively new. And I
Oh,
mentioned
yeah.
that a little bit yesterday, Greg. I can pretty much tell what apps are what by looking at it. But in this case,
Yeah.
you in the olden days, you would have had a solid line to work with. So that would have been very apparent that they used the Reflect app. In this case, you did a nice
Mhm.
job of masking out the hard edge on that. So
I just wish it gave you, like, some apps when you're actually pressing on the screen, you'll have a little pop-up in the corner to show you what you're masking out, so you can kinda trace it a
yeah, you
little
have to
better.
guess. Yep.
Yeah, your finger's always in the way,
hmm
and, but, but I think it did a pretty decent job, and
When I was doing, oops, sorry about that. When I was doing challenges on my iPhone, I would use one of these things.
oh,
It's
yeah.
got a rubber tip on it, and it makes it a lot
Yeah.
easier
Mm.
to work on your screen.
Yeah. Now do you find it's responsive? Like,
Oh yeah,
is it
yeah, sure,
really?
yeah,
Okay. So Todd said, "Dwight, have you used the mobile version of Photoshop? Your thoughts?"
yeah. I mean, I've used it. I think it's getting better. I think for right now, it's probably best for adding text or maybe changing a background, something like that. For the hardcore editing, I would still prefer the desktop version. But I think it's coming along pretty quick. I do need to play with it more, so I can't give, an honest review as of yet, as I'm pretty much have the Tony Kuiper panels, baked into my workflow on the desktop. But Todd, I'll look into that a little bit
Yeah.
more and report back to you.
Yeah, and we'll probably get a peek at those as soon as we get our butts in gear and get an editing program going. But Dave, you've used that Photoshop a little bit, I think?
Yeah, just not too much, just a little bit, and honestly, I not en I n enough to download it and try it, but honestly, not too much with it, to be honest, not enough to give a good review.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
when Adobe had the Adobe and it no
Photoshop
longer
Express?
exists. No, 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 there was a camera app that it could do editing that things such as
Photoshop camera.
Photoshop camera, yeah, where it would you could go in and, like, replace the entire sky without any issue. They had a reflection edit in that you would just now with there was no adjustment or anything else going on. It was pretty much simply, we're gonna put a reflection here and everything it'll look like you're half underwater. So you have to be careful how the
Right.
photo is. But it did a good job in terms of yes, you could tell it was fake, but it did a good job with the reflection on a rippling body of water. Unfortunately, that app Adobe decided to get rid of. It was a free app, so I'm assuming they put it out for testing and they got everything they needed to out of testing, so they brought a bunch of stuff inside on a
Hmm.
paid version.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on a wee tiny tangent, I hope that doesn't happen to Project Indigo. I hope they're not just testing it and then gonna throw everything into Lightroom Mobile, the camera part of Lightroom Mobile that they've got into Indigo. I'm not sure what their plans are for that, but let's see here. So creative ideas and fun techniques. Well, that I think that, throwing in a fake reflection with an app, I think is kind of a creative and fun way to do things.
Yeah, Greg, while you're on
But
that, you can also use a portable mirror. Now, I just bought one. I think it's by like an 8x6 that you can hold underneath your camera just like this. There's a mirror here,
oh,
and
okay.
then you can kind of play with it until the composition's right. Try to get
Hmm.
my hand straight, and then you can kind of do it that way. I haven't gone out to try it yet, but I think it's kind of tricky. I think if you can do, like a sunset, maybe, work with the horizon or something like that. You may have to clip the sides or something, but I did go ahead and buy one of
Mhm.
those. So,
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's definitely a creative way. Puddlegrams, and that's just what the outline had thrown into it was, but that's reflections in puddles with boots, bicycles, city life, so I think I've seen people do photos of, like, city streets at sunset with their camera right down to, like you showed there, Dwight, right down to almost to the surface of the water, and that really makes a cool photo, and it's one of those things that's on, like I said, it's on the back of my mind here to try one of these days. Self-portraits in sunglasses or windows, you can capture your own portrait that way. What else we got here? Layered reflection shots,
Great.
so
While,
subject
while
and
while we're going down that, there is someone on Instagram I follow who one of her main things is dealing with puddles. Her handle is City Life Adventures. It's Color Cardello, and she has and she even described exactly what we were talking about, Dwight, about taking a bottle of water, taking some water, putting it on the ground, making your own puddle to get the reflection, especially for framing a shot. Because you're like, okay, this would be great if there was a reflection here, no water. You can make your own reflection there instead of trying to come upon a puddle and get lucky with the angles.
yeah. Well, I'll have to get that Instagram handle from you, and we'll put that in the show notes because, I mean, hey, if she's doing reflections, why not showcase her, right? Abstract reflections, distortions in rippling water. So we have another one here from Dwight, and I'll bring that up. It has just that. It has some really cool abstract reflection in the water.
yeah, this is the Balboa Ferry coming from the Newport Peninsula to Balboa Island. It was just a standard cruise across the water. And I think, this kind of is a little bit more about the timing, right? You spoke about that earlier, Greg. I saw these reflections coming off the water and I was scrambling for my camera and I had to wait for the boat to be at the right spot. Remember, I think one of your other bullet points was, be patient. So I had to kind of wait for the composition to come through, and I kind of waited till that red on the left started bleeding off, and then I got it. So, I think this is abstracty, right? I mean, I think, we
I mean, if you crop that in half and just took the top half,
yeah,
that's a crazy good abstract, right?
or flip it, right?
Yeah.
Just flip it,
Yeah.
and that'll, people want to know what's going on there. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. So we will have our little surprise at the end of the video here is, and if you're just listening to the audio, go to the YouTube channel, go to this episode in the live section of the YouTube channel and check this out. This is an experiment. We'll see how it goes, but we're going to play a video slideshow of images that showcase reflection. So I think there might be a couple in there that we've already talked about today, but most of them are completely different. So,
and these are our photos, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, they're all our photos, not necessarily recent, but that's okay. Okay, so the one that stands out in my mind kind of touches on a layered reflection shot. So the subject and reflected background, you're going to see one that, I might as well give you a spoiler alert on this one. It's the back window of my truck. And I was walking up the driveway and the sun was setting and I saw it reflected in the back window and I thought, that is so cool. So I took that shot. So you'll see that in here, but you're going to see all other, different kinds of reflections, including just reflected light. Like in Dwight's photo of the palm trees, there's going to be one that's just you're going to wonder, why is that there? Well, it's reflecting light off the walls, and it's just really, really cool the way it does it. So,
and there's some diffused light there. I think there's one I put in there with diffused light in a museum.
Yeah.
With real, with the colors and stuff, how it kind of bleeds off into white. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. And I think that might be the one I'm thinking of. David Addison, any chance to show off his bloody truck? Well, what can I say? I like my ride. But so we're going to sign off now, and this is just going to be at the end of the YouTube video, and then once it's over, we'll cut the stream. But I want to thank everybody for listening in live to the YouTube channel, and thank you to everybody who subscribes to the channel. And we're getting closer and closer to 1,000. We're into the 970s now, so we're not far from 1,000 subscribers, and I'd love to hit that by
next week.
I don't know, by the end of by next week. Yeah,
boom, hit it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if you
like
know friends, I
subscribe.
must say, not only you like and subscribe, but maybe tell a friend, or if you're by a friend's computer and they're logged in, just subscribe for them. It's a gift. It's the gift of a better iPhone for, how bad their photos are. We don't want to say it. We're not naming names, but we know who you're talking about. They could deal with better photos. We're helping. Let us help them. Let us help you help them. Subscribe to our channel in their name.
It helps our algorithm for sure.
Yeah, that's right.
And we like.
Yeah, and if you think anything that you saw here was useful, by all means, share it on social media. So one thing that we can do in our Facebook group is, if you have any tips on reflections, by all means, put them in there. And if you have reflection photos, when you upload them, put the hashtag on there that's podcast reflections. So share your pictures in the group, and Will Newcomb, if you're listening, I don't know, he hasn't said anything in the chat, so I'm not sure if he's listening live or not, but he was putting some really nice reflection photos on, especially that one of his cats. So, repost those, Will, and hashtag them podcast reflections, and they'll be easier for us to find. So let's see, I think that's all I've got. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel. I have one person that subscribes regularly through the Buy Me a Coffee campaign, and that is awesome. Thank you very much. Link in the description for that too. And Anyway, guys, it was a great discussion on reflection.
Enjoy the video.
Way to reflect.
Enjoy it. Have a great
Yes,
week, everyone.
enjoy the video.
Take care, everyone.
All right.
Wow, that was a good ending.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoy putting videos like that together.